for making yourself come down after lunch. The only way is up from here now. So my name is Nikhil. I am a vice president at. So my name is Nikhil. I am a vice president at Samagra. I'll be helping kind of moderate this entire breakout. So the large theme that we have kept for the justice and law space is on nurturing a person-centric dispute resolution ecosystem, right? Looking at law and justice at a dispute resolution level, not at whether it's just a court, whether it's just online dispute resolution, alternate and so on, but looking at overall dispute resolution at large. Generally, if you look at any sector that has been there so far, it could be, take the example of health, education, service delivery, anything. People generally talk about it being something centric. If you go in health, they would say, hey, we should build a patient-centric system. In education, they might say it should be child-centric or teacher-centric. Similarly, in a benefit delivery, they might say it should be citizen-centric. But in the legal space, so far the conversation has generally been around how it should be just, it should be fair, it should follow due process, it should be law abiding, and so on and so forth. While all of these are principles and values to keep in mind, it is still important for that the entire system is some person-centric as well. So today's breakout is part exploration and part provocation on how this can be done. So I'll hand over to Supriya, who is a co-founder and creator at Agami. She'll help us put a large framework to how this could be done. And then we have amazing talks by people who are actually working, trying and making things more person-centric. Over to Supriya.
Thanks, Nikhil. So, thanks all for coming here, and I'm really excited to be talking about this issue or this field as a whole. You know, like sometimes we think about disputes or law and justice as something that happens to somebody else somewhere else, but I'm fairly sure all of us in this room have at some point had like some issue with our bank payment, some issue with some bill that had to kind of not be paid. And in a way, if you think about it, forget the hardcore crime kind of thing, disputes are part of our everyday life, like all of us kind of face it. And historically, there have been many efforts. I think most of us, if you think of most justice initiatives, you think, you know, how do I find a way not to engage with any of these institutions? You'll try avoiding the police to death, you'll try avoiding the courts to death, or any a lawyer also, right? Like these are all things that we do as, if I really have to come to it, how do I do? Today, what we hope to do in, I press the middle button.
I think it'll not work. You'll have to
do it there?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So before we jump into the field, right, I think I wanted to share a learning that we have drawn from to anchor our conversation. Historically, a lot of reform or efforts have been, if you see in the 90s, most efforts were around how do we internalize internal workflows, right? Whether it was a bank, whether it was a company, you'll have ERP systems, CRM systems saying, let's manage our processes end to end internally, right? You had that galore happening through the 90s. But most of those was designed to say, how do I make my institution more efficient? How do I streamline processes better? How do I do improve time and speed? It didn't really change too much for the user. So if you were a customer, you were still going with that slip. You were still kind of standing in line, still saying, I want that money out of the bank, right? But in the 2000s, we saw slowly an exposure of those internal workflows out, right? Basically, then they started creating net banking. They started creating mobile apps. They started creating a few things that helped transform the experience of a customer. The latest over the last decade, and something that we all use, something like UPI actually was a shift in how fundamentally we think about digitization. It didn't start by saying, how do I make my bank more efficient? It didn't say, how do I make this process little bit happen instead of 3 days, this existing process of withdrawing money faster. It started asking, what does this customer want to do? Hey, you know, Supriya wants to pay him money. Can we make that really easy? They both have a phone. It would be really great if they could exchange. And so it kind of puts the person's need at the center and then says, so then what do I need to do as a bank? What do you need to do as RBI? What do you need to do as a Paytm? What do you need to do as GPay? So it kind of starts putting what the person needs and more. The reason I thought this is a useful example is it kind of shows us, we talk, because the whole conference is about DPGs. Fundamentally, it's about digitization for what and for who, right? We're talking about saying, how do you really change how do you make our systems more user-centric? Because there is no point of a DPG or a DPI if it isn't really enabling that, if it isn't enabling universal access. Can we, like, why we all love the UPI story is your auto driver and your vendor there has it. So if you're thinking about the law and justice system, can we think about what would it take for courts to actually go reach that person, or a lawyer to reach a person where they are, rather than making them come to the bank, right? Because when we tried creating branches of banks around the country, that didn't work. It didn't, we tried creating to say, oh, in this remotest corner, create a correspondent who will be there. Those linear ways don't work. So what would it take for us to flip and say, okay, now this is where people are, this is what they need. How do we then design or digitize and think about even what the DPGs are coming from there? So fundamentally, now coming to the field of law and justice, without us thinking about, oh, how can my law firm function better and I have a better management system for a law firm, or how can my police FIR system better, to say how do we break these silos between them, to saying what would it look like if we start by designing the person at the center, right? Now, I think many of you in the room are technologists, so you'll understand this idea of domain decomposition, which is because this field is huge. For your dispute to get from figuring this is my problem, this is my right, this is who I need to go to, I need to make this payment, I need this document as evidence, I need to go do this. It's a set of various transactions. It can feel complex and daunting. So can we, when we're thinking about whether it's problem solving, and of course DPGs and DPIs are a part of that, how do we break it into smaller solvable problems, right? Because if I say I want to change the entire system at once, it feels like it's not going to happen in the next 500 centuries. So how do we do that? And how do we think about, because today what the world allows is for me to solve one piece of that puzzle, for you to solve another piece, and for you to solve another piece, but for us to kind of connect and make sure that they work together. So we took this thinking into the field and we said, how do we, any questions so far? I'll just stop here to ask. Okay, go ahead. Just feel free to raise and ask if some part isn't making sense. So we just said at a very elementary level, right? What would a person want if you say, first, you want to prevent a dispute. You first of all don't want to have an issue where, oh, my loan, like I lent money and that person is not paying back at a simple level, right? Or I want to make sure that a contract default in some way is avoided. Then if worst case scenario, if it happens, I want to be able to get good advice. I want to have reliable advice for it. Then I want to be able to prepare for it. Then I want to initiate. Now, which forum I go to may be different. I might go to my local panchayat leader, I might go to a lawyer, I might go to a court. Who I go to is different, but I want to initiate and present my case, because now I can't solve this with this person. I want to get a resolution to say, hey, this is what I can do, this is my solution, which is most of us see it as a judgment or as something that clears it. And I want to make sure that it is actually enforced. If I say, Smita, please pay back this much money to somebody, that actually it happens. We don't just say, you have enough orders that are passed saying, this forest should not be cut and it still gets cut. How do you enforce what happens? So these are typically what people want. And this is again just an anecdotal thing, for range of people who today are playing these roles. So for example, in advice, today paralegals play, lawyers play, law firms play, to be honest, websites and Google plays a role, counselors plays a role, like different legal tech companies are coming in to play these roles in different ways. You also have somebody like the Legal Aid Authority. There are people who are providing research tools. So for each of this, I'm not going to get exhaustively, you have a whole host of people who are today already doing, not even thinking tomorrow who could that person be, right? And each of these services can be thought about very differently, right? So for example, today we think of only a police or a India Post delivering a notice when there is a problem. But tomorrow, could it be Zomato or Swiggy delivering that, right? Like we can think about new roles and actors in different ways. Then we think about Then this is the heart of it, right? And this is where the opportunity for us really to start thinking DPI and DPGs is. Because these are the different services. Ultimately, at some level, the citizen doesn't care who's providing. They want the service. They don't care if you're going to give me better advice or ChatGPT is going to give me advice. If ChatGPT is going to be as reliable advice as Kapil Sibal, I'll go to ChatGPT. So when you think about the services, it allows us to actually first not be constrained by what is today, but to think about what is it that the citizen or any company also might want. Very often you want advisory, how that advice can come in different shapes and forms. I want to be able to discover who can I call if I have a problem in Like most of my WhatsApp groups from college are all, do you know a divorce lawyer in Bombay? Do you know somebody, like half anyone who's gone to law school, that's your thing, right? Then you want to be able to make payments. I have to pay this person this, that. So because it's really hard to find a reliable person that you can kind of work with. Somebody who can help you with evidence collection. Document management, because half the time we have lost documents. Somebody will say you need this paper from this 30 years ago, if you have a property dispute that showed this one thing. What is a good way for us to manage our documents in today's day and time, right? Like, we've made some headway with things like DigiLocker and things like that, but what would it look like if you had to extend it all the way? Authorization, I need to be able to say, hey, you go and represent me in front of this forum. I am not there. That is when you break it down into small parts, there are a range of different services: signing, research. I want someone to do transcription and translation. I want someone to do case management of the whole thing. So these are a range of services that are kind of there that we need. And most often these services need to speak to each other, because they don't today. You may have a lawyer providing advisory and document services, but tomorrow you could say, I'm only providing advisory, I go to somebody else. How can these two speak to each other, right? Because that connection is going to be so important in terms of being able to think about how a system will work for a user versus making me run pillar to post. So today, for example, if I have to submit a document to a mediator, I have to go to the bank, get them to give it to me, sign it, put a seal. I as a citizen have to go run and go give it to somebody else. But what if these institutions could very easily directly speak to each other, right? So we're saying, for example, with a case management system, a court or a law firm or anybody runs, it would be great if research could plug in very straight into it, right? Like, or different information or transcription systems. You may be providing only a transcription solution, and how do I plug it into what I have? So we are no more thinking one person or one institution has to do all of this, or even a combination. When you break it down, how do you design for it, right? So this is really the heart, like if you see like between the need and the services. But we are realizing there's a third outermost layer which is very important from a perspective of building or thinking about the system, is you usually need very trustworthy information. There are certain things, like for example, you will not believe it, even a judge sometimes today doesn't know, am I looking at the most updated version of the law? Something as simple as that, because amendments are passed from time to time to time. It is so much harder than you think, even for people on top, to get it with them. So a lot of these things, too, if I'm hiring you as a lawyer, how do I know you're not a quack? Or like, how do I know that you are a legitimate lawyer and not pretending to be one? Is there a way for me to go quickly verify you are a legitimate person who went to a law school and is registered with the bar, right? Because there's so much fraud happening. So like that, there is a lot of what we are saying need for registries. I think most of you familiar with the DPG space would understand that you need these registries, which are absolutely not existent in the field of law today. Of course, they don't need to be centralized. We could have that as a highly federated system, but there is this need of this, right? I'm going to stop here because I want you to see this as a vision and a picture for what the potential of the law and justice field is. It's almost like if you were entering a country or a land and you were planning a city, it helps to kind of see and imagine, like, here's where the park is going to be, here is where the sports center is going to be, here's the residential area or the complex, because then even if I'm building my small little house, I know how it fits. The reason why today our cities look like this is I build what I want, where I want, and then we're dealing with issues like floods and whatever. So we felt that before we get into the building of DPGs and technology and digitizing in the field of law and justice, it's important that we all have a shared understanding of what that end state can look like. Is this what we all want to see? If yes, I might just pick these three services and build a DPG for that. Or I might say I will just build this one registry. I might say I will actually just do two pieces or build a protocol that connects one and the two, right? So a lot of the conversations you're going to hear after this, people jumping in, are going to start showing you pieces of this puzzle that have started being built. But really, I don't think that's even 1% of what is needed, so there's a lot more that's there. So, but I hope this gives you all a picture of what is needed for the field.
Thank you, Supriya. I will now request Smita from Dux to come up.
She's the lead for strategic initiatives at Daksh, and Smita will take us through, like Supriya was saying, one piece that is already functioning on the cause list that are available in court. Cause list is a detail of the day, whatever the judge is doing in that day, that's the cause list. Each courtroom publishes its own. How can you make that accessible? How can you look at that as open data and then use that across? Over to Smita.
So is it in this one or I have to switch?
I'll just-
Thank you. Perfect, great. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for coming today, for joining this. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is good? Yeah. Is kind of how research can start a bit of a pipeline that leads to prototypes and leads to DPGs actually being built. With the example of Daksh's listing project and a report that we very recently released on the way that cause lists are created. So sometimes a cause list can look like this. Can be a bunch of papers stapled outside a courtroom. Sometimes it might look like this, like a longer, more clear one. But yeah, what is a cause list? Thank you, Nikhil, for that. But a cause list is typically a daily, can be not daily as well, list or calendar of the cases that would actually be heard in a particular courtroom or by a particular judge or bench. So it would establish how cases are prioritized, scheduled, and actually sequenced for the judges and benches. You can't see it here, but one glaring thing that's missing from this is time, is an indication of when in the day a case might actually come up for hearing. And you might think that it would be sequential, but it's often not sequential, which can cause a lot of chaos for lawyers who are figuring out where they have to be in which place on a particular day and even plan out kind of that. So cause lists are a very critical part of how, yeah, the planning of a day, the preparing for a case that's going to come up would actually be. And so the problem that comes up in interacting with cause lists is that the rules for how cause lists are supposed to be put together are often extremely difficult to find, not well known, or not actually followed in practice. The rules can focus on legal principles without actually talking about like the day-to-day practicality. So for example, you would have lists sometimes where there are up to 100 or 150 cases that are listed for the day, and it is objectively just a fact that many of these may not be actually heard on the day that it's listed. Listing is also extremely personality driven. So it often depends more on the instructions that a judge would give to registry officials than any stable or kind of static processes in general. And you would have kind of a main list, a supplementary list, a lot of different types of lists. So not only in one list would you not really know the sequencing, you might not know how they would be taken up and how they relate to each other in a day as well. So the report itself is a 70-page report that goes into a number of problems with the way that cause lists are put together and the kinds of chaos that it causes for different users, lawyers primarily, but also litigants who want to know when their cases are going to come up. And so that involves kind of actually figuring out how to prepare for it, actually figuring out where you have to be, costs involved, briefing senior counsels, things like that. But today, because of the audience, I'm going to focus on two in particular. Accessibility for persons with disabilities and also the kind of the ecosystem that creates case management solutions on top of the cause list that comes out. So looking at the accessibility kind, in Supriya's circle where she talked about the users, there are some of those categories that are mutually exclusive, but there are some that are not. And so this in particular goes into the challenges that persons who have visual disabilities can have. And so one is that the audio capture that's actually put in, it can be very distorted and difficult to cross to even reach the cause list. In terms of the way the cause list as a PDF on a website is actually set up, it's a tabular structure with PDF. In a PDF, so a screen reader like JAWS might read across and break up individual elements and not even, which just makes it garbled nonsense, impossible to really understand. And then OCR challenges in actual scanned documents still persist despite all of the code, the tech and the softwares that do exist. So when we're looking at kind of the visual challenge, the persons who like the visual challenge side of it, semantic structuring of cause lists and having just a better interactive way of putting information together becomes very critical. Then coming to the whole ecosystem of people who provide case management software, all of them are extremely reliant on, they are able to interact with the back end and the way data is kind of stored, but the cause list itself, the digital version of it, would often have just one respondent party and that one respondent's advocate listed. So a private solution, case management solution would need to have a pre-existing repository of all kinds of case data to even be able to figure out the other parties involved and the other lawyers involved. So what tends to happen a lot of the time is there's someone in an office whose job is Control F with a PDF, or would actually be manual checking of all of the cases that are listed in a particular courtroom to make sure that lawyers aren't missing crucial days that they need to be present. So this kind of gets to the DPG part of the conversation, which is thinking of cause lists not as a static PDF or an artifact, but thinking of cause lists as an open data set that can be released to allow different kinds of people to build solutions that will meet the needs of diverse user categories. And so that's, I think, the crucial part of this today. As I said, it's a 70-page PDF, a research report, but things like the OCR and things like the audio capture, that's very much a modular thing that someone can work on without really needing to be worried about what comes before and what comes after and how that would really be picked up. And so we realized that instead of putting out a report, this time what we'll do is along with the report, we'll put out a prototype, which is an interactive website, and a 7-minute introductory video that actually gives an indication of what is being said and all of the recommendations. So it's actually an interactive way to see how they would look in practice. So the screen reader section right up here has a small list of screen readers that are compatible with this website, as well as which ones are free and which ones are commercial. In addition, the main and the supplementary list listed here, there's also an entire list, which kind of has an indication of, let's see, is this gonna work? Has an indication of, how the main and the supplementary lists would be sequenced in that day, with either time or even just saying forenoon and afternoon to give some indication of when it might actually come up. Another part of it is the full case details, where if you click on the case number, it will open up a space with all of the respondents listed, a widget to add to calendar, a widget to kind of connect to WhatsApp, enable a lot of capture of different kinds of information that is currently either disaggregated or kind of available in different places. And then what happens as well is there's a lot of information that's very familiarity based, in that someone who's familiar with that courtroom would know it, but outstation lawyers would not, other people would not. And so it can be and this would be available in different places in the list, or even just in different documents, different spaces altogether. So in this example, this particular courtroom hears GST matters on Monday and Tuesday, and income tax, customs, and central excise on Thursday and Friday. So if a case were to be adjourned that day, on say Tuesday, a GST case, it would best case come up the next Monday. And so those are things that otherwise are not really accessible and knowable without it being present. So I think the point of this prototype is, again, our prototype is based on test data. So it is a little bit of a dummy site. It's based on an existing, it's not a data in, data out version. But because this prototype exists, means it's possible to develop a higher fidelity prototype that either does these things or some other things, meets different needs, works in different ways. And so finally, kind of for a handoff, I'm just gonna say, if you do treat the cause list as a data set or an open data set where the different fields have a little explanation, where you know what is given in them, where you know why there might be data quality issues and something not being filled up, that means that it is possible to throw it open to a community that can actually build better solutions that make sense for different types of people who not always need the same things. And on the development of technology, it exists as one piece of the puzzle within this whole continuum, where you would need to think, so not developers in particular, but someone or the other needs to be thinking about how governance is happening, how change management is happening, how preparedness to actually run pilots and test things before scaling them out at large across large complex systems would actually go. And so the tech is a crucial part of a puzzle, and the puzzle requires, so there's, I think, a saying in the design community that design is too important to be left only to designers, and that's something that applies very much in the law and justice space as well. So I will thank you so much.
Thank you, Smita. We have another Smita coming up. She's part of the Open Nyay community. She'll be talking about Jugalbandi and Pulse, which is now taking a protocol lens and also adding some AI into it, and how that is coming in the same framework as well.
Hi everyone.
In early 2024, Shakti Shalini began testing.
Hi everyone. So good to be here. Today I'll just quickly talk about how the person-centric dispute resolution ecosystem and the digital public goods and the digital public infrastructure that we've built around that, how that manifests in Jugalbandi and the Pulse protocol. But even before I go into the DPG world of it, let's look at two user cases or user personas, right? So at one level, we're looking at frontline justice workers. You may wonder what are frontline justice workers. Even before you do that, these are the problems they face, right? So let's say paralegals or community workers who are working with citizens to enable them to access legal aid, legal information, legal services, access to rights and entitlements. They themselves are saying that we are not able to interpret the law in our regional languages so that we can simplify it further and then present it to citizens. They're saying that there is a lack of an effective system where they can manage all the information, all the case histories that is coming up and provide it back to the organizations with which they're working. They don't have a robust knowledge sharing framework. In 2009, the National Legal Service Authority of India came up with the paralegal volunteer scheme to create a registry and network of all paralegal volunteers in the country. Today, that is an entirely defunct system. If you call them, 3/4 of them will say, how did you get my number? Who are you? I don't know what a paralegal is. And so there is definitely, because there is no such network or registry available, there is also a lack of a robust knowledge sharing framework. So on and so forth, right? There are a bunch of other issues that they face. So this is, let's say, this is one user persona in the concentric circles that Supriya shared. The second kind of user, let's look at somebody who has had their check bounced. Right? So let's say I gave a check to Supriya and it bounced. There are breakages at multiple levels, right? First, I won't even know that my check has bounced. Second, the bank has no idea that this has happened. Third, Supriya won't know what to do about that information. Now, does she reach out to me? Does she go to the bank? Does she go to the court? Is it a civil suit? Is it a criminal suit? The options are endless, right? So the user here could be many different people, but let's say the user here is somebody for whom the check has bounced. Now, in these two scenarios, what do we really do and what are the solutions that we can come up with? So Jugalbandi, just for context, really actually means a duet in a Hindustani classical music context. And so, what we're saying is that Jugalbandi is a duet between this conversational AI platform and a citizen or the user. Right? So it's an AI-powered, multilingual, multimodal stack that you can use to provide information as well as actions. So I can go to this, intelligent conversational bot and say, hey, my check was bounced. What do I do? So not only do I get information, I also get access to what are some of the reliable actions I can take, which is reaching out to this particular bank, and I do that on the bot itself and so on and so forth. So that's one part of it, right? In the context of, let's say, check bouncing. Let's say in the context of the frontline justice work or the paralegal situation I shared, what is the Pulse protocol? The protocol for unified legal services. How many of you are familiar with the Beacon protocol? Just raise of hands. Okay, cool. So the Beacon protocol essentially is a network that allows for peer-to-peer and decentralized digital networks. Let's break that down, right? Can you conduct economic or non-economic, but let's say for the sake of this example, economic transactions with multiple organizations, let's say banks in this scenario, in one go, right? So it's not a one-on-one. If I, let's say, have to apply for a loan, I don't actually just go to one bank and then I go to the other, then I go to the third. Instead, can I put out a request for a loan to 100 different banks at the same time and get access to all of the information, the lead gen, and so on and so forth. So the Beacon protocol allows for this in, let's say, in the financial domain that I just explained. But how could the Beacon protocol and this standardization approach of one to many and many to many work in the law and justice domain? So we said that what if we could create a protocol for legal services? And that would enable the discovery and engagement of legal service providers. Who are legal service providers? Of course, they're lawyers, there are mediators, arbitrators, providing online dispute resolution. So outside the formal justice system, outside the formal court systems. And so we created the Pulse protocol, and this was again a huge community-led effort to allow for discovery of different ODR service providers, ODR online dispute resolution. Now the funny thing is that this only works when you have a standardized template of who the ODR service providers are. Luckily today, luckily or unluckily, today we have approximately 25 ODR providers in the country. But let's take the example of frontline justice workers. We don't even know how many there are. There are for sure more than 1 lakh. And this is only the ones who are affiliated or associated with a registered organization, which is why I'm even able to give you a ballpark. But for a number of such unregistered workers in that sense who are providing such a critical service, there is no registry, there is no network for their discoverability to even happen. So what do we do in this scenario? Let's take a look. Yes, this is just, I should have probably done this before while I was speaking, but this is basically how the Pulse protocol works as well, right? That what happens today is that there is a seeker, there is a citizen who says, I want to understand which, let's say, agricultural subsidiary scheme I might be eligible for. And I go on a platform like CPGrams or Parivesh or whichever, or one of the government, and I try and get this information. So it's one-on-one, right? But can we reimagine this to say that there is a seeker, there is a citizen who needs that information. They go on one platform which is hooked onto multiple providers at the same time. So all of the different organizations, whether they're government, public, private, not-for-profit, all of them can at the same time provide information to say, okay, imagine this, right? Like when you are looking for an Uber ride and you send a request, all of the drivers in, let's say, a 5-kilometer range get a pop-up. Imagine if you could do that for like legal services. I have a complaint saying that, I'm being abused in my house or my child is being abused, and I raise sort of a legal aid complaint. And all of the frontline justice workers in a 5-kilometer area get a pop-up through this kind of a protocol-based approach, and I'm then able to basically go to the relevant one. So this is the many-to-many sort of the interoperable approach here. Any questions? Any thoughts here before I go on to the demo part of it? Okay, I think we're short on time, so I'll just quickly show you an example of how this works in the context of check bouncing. So I send this message saying, hey, and it says, okay, choose a language. So for the purposes of this demo, we've done English, and we've chosen to keep it to text. So I'm saying that the check has bounced, it was given to me, so I want to go to online dispute resolution. So it's asking me, do you want to know even what it is? I'm like, no, I'm fairly familiar. So it's saying, please note that availing the services will have a fee. You will have to pay a fee. So I'm saying, yeah, that's okay. I'm ready to pay the fees. Once I do that, it is giving me options of, let's say, 3 to 4 ODR service providers who can basically solve my issue. What is sort of missing in this demo is also a categorization of what your grievance is. So that can easily be hooked in. This demo does not have that. But basically by understanding, okay, this is the level or category of your dispute, these are the 3 ODR providers. So once I understand that if I've chosen a DAC, this is the fee, this is etc., I've chosen them, and then I give all of my details, right? Now what is interesting here that you'll notice is a lot of this is personally identifiable information. It's sensitive data. I'm giving my mobile number, my address, etc. But you'll see that as soon as I'm also giving the details of the person whose check has bounced and the person I want to raise this complaint against. So bounced check. Once I do that, you'll see that none of this actually gets captured on the bot itself, because this is PII. It just says sent. So it has gone into the back end, but anybody else who wants to now further access it won't be able to do so. I also fill a consent form saying that I want to send this information to the ODR service provider, and all of this is happening. So the UI that you see here is built on Jugalbandi, but how this is enabled is through the Pulse protocol. So this is basically if Pulse protocol, the standardizations templates of all the ODR providers were to be done, and then they be discoverable on a user-centric platform like this. You must have noticed in the beginning that it is available in all Indian languages. I will just leave us with like this one thought on frontline justice workers, and I'll probably stop here because I'm out of time. But how can we 10x this work, right? What are the potential solutions? Can it be a case management system? Solved problem. Could it be a registry and network of frontline justice workers that we could use the beacon protocol, learn from examples like Vistar, Open Agri Network? Can we create robust data pipelines for discovery and digestion of legal data? Do we need to create a digital case diary, credentialing system, a discovery marketplace? So all of this again, looking at what the user needs, we are able to look at, not go from a process-centric thing, because we could have easily said that, okay, just create like 2-3 more CSC centers, enable CSC centers, do more capacity building for frontline justice workers. Rather, we are saying we're moving away from a process-centric resolution mechanism to a people-centric one, and saying, no, this is what paralegals need, and even if it is as simple as something like a case management system, which is a solved technical challenge, it's still an unsolved design, adoption, maintenance challenge that we need to look at from that user-centric approach. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Smita. We have one last speaker, and then we'll have a panel conversation. Last speaker is Aditi. She's part of Samagra. While both the Smitas have kind of, can you put your leg? Kind of spoken about different parts of the puzzle, Aditi will take us through how even the judiciary is thinking of something on similar lines as well, right, from the court side. So that's what Aditi's presentation is.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikhil. So I'm going to take a leap of faith and almost ask, when as a person, and I am not a lawyer, I had nothing to do with the law and justice space for a long time, but as a person or as a citizen, if I think about the courts, what's the one dialogue or the one thing that always comes to our yeah, and that is it, right? Like, that's the perception of courts to even regular common people, and it's not arbitrary. It's based in data, in the sense that today, if we look at all of our courts, from Supreme Court at the apex to High Court at the state, and then lower courts, which are district courts and tribunals, etc., there are 5 crore plus pending cases that exist. And of these pending cases, if you really look a little bit deeper, most of them are stuck in two phases of a case life cycle, or phases of a resolution of a case in a court. One is the appearance stage, which means I'm waiting for someone to come to the court. I have filed a case, I've filed a complaint, and I'm waiting for the other person to turn up at the court for it to even begin. That's 31%. And the rest of it, another 1/3, is at the evidence stage, where you have come to the court and now you're waiting for some documentation, for someone to prove something, for it to be authentically verified, for the judge to get that confidence that yes, it indeed is material to the case. And what ends up happening in this is that if you look at numbers again, from the first hearing to this evidence, it takes about a year, 331 days, and another 384 days on an average from that hearing or from that evidence stage to judgment. So typically, across cases, of course, and different types of cases, you would end up spending at least more than 2 years just getting through that resolution process. And tarikh pe tarikh, which is what everyone said, is like date on date time goes by and you don't know where it is headed. So that's what a person is facing. And at the other side of it, anchoring back to Supriya's diagram, is one of the key service provider, which is the court. And of course, a lot of people can solve disputes, but the court is one place where people do go to disputes, and are one place where all of this is where I'm anchoring at. The other thing, apart from time, that a person does feel, we were talking about this information, is the cost that the person is incurring. Both in terms of actually to be part of a legal process, if I have to pay legal fees, if I have to attend court hearings, if I have to travel somewhere, what is that cost per case per day? It's about roughly 1,000 around. And annually, that is how much people would spend. 30,000 crore rupees is how much people would spend just on being part of that process. And the other cost is that is my opportunity cost. In order to be part of that case, I am not doing something. I'm not going to work on that day. I'm not going to I'm not going to get my daily wage. I'm not going to end up doing something. So there's an opportunity cost, which also amounts to another 1.7 thousand per day per case. And if we go hearing after hearing, then it'll amount to 50,000 crore rupees annually. Which means that 0.7%, if you add up the numbers, look at the GDP, etc., if you do that basic math, you would end up at 0.77% of your GDP is spent by litigants across all the cases every year. And that's a significant amount. And if you look at it, it's a lot of my time and also money that is being spent. So that's the challenge, or that's the need. And what do we have so far, even before we come to this, what do we have so far, or what we've seen as an effort is that digitization has been functional. So somebody needed to file and there was an e-filing system. Somebody needed to pay, there was a payment system. Somebody needed to do something, there was another system, and there was, all of these became functions that were digitized, but not necessarily catered to me as a user, not necessarily catered to me in the flow of my case, in how I am coming across different things around. And so the fundamental shift that we saw could be possible to make this actually litigant-centric or person-centric was to shift from functions to case as a unit of change, which means that you pick one case and you take it from the time that the dispute occurred till the very end, and you solve for that user across all the different functions, all the different services that they will need throughout that case. And you do it for that one case and you try it out, and then you can replicate all of, like you can go case by case to expand or extend it to other case types as well. So that was the one fundamental shift that we thought that we observed could be made while making court administration more people-centric. And so when we started doing a lot of that analysis also from the circle, a case goes from typically, and these are like stages of a case life cycle, something before filing, to filing the case, to the court being like, yes, it's a valid case, let me admit it, to them summoning the appearance stage, like summoning the other person to also be a part of it, the trial, which is where your evidence and everything lies, to judgment. So this is a typical case cycle. And when we thought through, when we picked different cases and like took them through this life cycle, we figured that there are some constructs, some tech constructs that are almost similar for any case type. The first of which is verifiable digital evidence. So a lot of our documentation, a lot of our information is digitized and authenticated and lies with people who have this information and who can validate it. So for example, had my check bounced, NPCI does have the data of whether my check bounced for insufficiency of funds or not. So that's information that a court could have access had they been able to speak with that entity or that institution. Second is just expanded jurisdiction for filing and trial especially. Why do if I am from Mumbai, why do I have to travel to Kerala, or why do I have to travel to Kochi, or even within my own state just to attend a case? Why could I not do it virtually? Why could I not have that? Why could courts not have that expanded jurisdiction to be able to cater to me? Then the third was rule-based processes. Across the life cycle, there's a lot of re-engineering of processes that is required, and you could enable it through a lot of rule-based process systems or rule-based process tech, which would make the system more efficient. Like we said previously also, a lot of it also has to do generally to make it more user-centric, to do with communication, not just between the court and the person, but the court and the advocate, the person and their own advocate, the other party's advocate, other institutions in general. So a lot of multi-channel and multi-people communication that ends up happening. The fifth thing is, right now, a lot of times, for anything to happen, I have to be present in front of that judge or in front of that, in the courtroom itself. So can a lot of these things be unbundled and almost done asynchronously? Can I submit a lot of my evidence already if I have it in place? Can I do a lot of the things that I currently now have to go to the court to do? Can I do it asynchronously? And finally, if all of this came together, can we have seamless, and can the courts have seamless integration with other dispute resolution providers? Courts are not the only place where disputes can be resolved. Can they speak to ODR players? Can they speak to other sort of dispute resolution providers and have a system or have a platform which is enabling the first time something like this can happen? And so while all of this in concept, like while we researched and when we thought about this concept, Kerala High Court actually took the leap of faith, and they launched their vision of 24/7 on courts on August 16th, which is their vision of how do they make their courts, one court in particular as a pilot, more person-centric, or how do they take the leap of faith and experiment to make it more person-centric. So instead of me talking about their vision, I'll just quickly play the video that planes that vision and gives you a sense of where are the courts placed at today and how are they thinking about making court administration more litigant centric. And I'll end with that as well, but just give me 1 second.
ഞാൻ ജോൺ കോശി. ഞാൻ കൊട്ടാരക്കരയിൽ കൊട്ടാരക്കരയിൽ എനിക്കൊരു ചെറിയൊരു തുണിക്കച്ചവടം ഉണ്ടാകും. അന്ന് 2020 കോവിഡിന്റെ സമയത്ത് ഞാൻ ഒരാളുടെ നിന്ന് ചെക്ക് വാങ്ങിച്ചിട്ട് ഞാനൊരു ഓർഡർ കൊടുത്തു. അന്ന് തൊട്ട് ആ പൈസ എനിക്ക് കിട്ടിയിട്ടില്ല. എന്നെ കൊണ്ട് പറ്റുന്ന എല്ലാം നോക്കിയാണ്. ലാസ്റ്റ് ഞാനൊരു വക്കീലിന്റെ അടുത്ത് തന്നെ ഇതുകൊണ്ട് ചെന്നു. ആ ഓരോ ദിവസവും കട അടച്ചിട്ടുമ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് ആ ദിവസത്തെ വരുമാനം ഇല്ലാതാവും. എന്നിട്ട് അവിടെ ഫീസ് കൊടുക്കാൻ പറയും. ഇതെല്ലാം കൊടുത്തു പോയി. ഞാൻ ഇതെല്ലാം കേൾക്കാൻ രാവിലെ തൊട്ട് വരുന്ന നിൽക്കുന്നത്. അവസാനം ഇത് അഡ്ജസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്തു. 2-3 വർഷമായി. എൻ്റെ ഈ പൈസ വാങ്ങിച്ച ആളെ ഒന്ന് ഇവിടെ ഒന്ന് എത്തിക്കാൻ തന്നെ എനിക്ക് ഇത്ര നാളായിട്ട് നടക്കുന്നില്ല. എന്താ ചെയ്യേണ്ടത് എനിക്ക് അറിയത്തില്ല.
India has officially pendency of 45 million cases. Many do not approach the Indian courts for obvious reason that they don't want to face the same situation of John Koshi. Well, we need to take courts to the people instead of people coming to the courts. The new on-court, open network court in Kollam, the first step in the long journey. This court will transform the check bouncing cases, which represent around 10% of existing pending cases.
We thought it would be a game changer if using the digital infrastructure that we have now, all the institutions converge and forward the requisite documents to the court so that the litigants may not have to run from pillar to post. Today, the entire system around courts is digitalized. We can easily harness it using the power of cutting-edge technology and streamline our entire process.
I verily feel that it's obligatory on the part of the courts to give the information to the litigant as well as the counsel at their fingertips. The litigant and the counsel should be guided and supported by any question that they ask.
The on-courts will be accessible 24/7. Lawyers and the litigants can file applications, produce evidence without the need to go to the court and having to wait there. The court will admit cases, we issue summons, take up the applications asynchronously without scheduling a hearing like the normal court.
And even when a hearing needs to be scheduled, I can request for rescheduling and coordinate dates asynchronously using this smart calendaring service.
We are sure that this would make the entire system transparent and accessible to all the stakeholders. We expect this to drastically reduce the life of a litigation.
Kollam is the start. We have growing number of disputes and diverse needs and process. The on-courts technology, this would enable other institutions and courts to use the modular applications of the on-court in your context. Together we can grow innovations that take justice to the citizens.
I'll leave you with that, but this is Kerala Kerala's vision of doing it, and right now they're using Drishti, which is powering the tech to enable their vision. But right now this is just the launch of what they would like to do in the coming future. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So we have another 10 minutes. Yes, we just have another 10 minutes. I'll just ask all the panelists to come on this side. We'll open it up for questions.
Bank.
Yeah.
With
yeah.
core banking,
Yeah.
with net banking or mobile banking, I'm actually accessing my account. I mean, it was not possible.
Possible before, yeah. So for example, in the one in Kollam, the first time the litigant has a login to the system. This is like the first time in the history of Indian judiciary that otherwise I'm so dependent on my lawyer to tell me, give me my case file, tell me what is happening, or I have to go to the court website to find out. Now we are saying, let the alert come to you, right? So I think, like, long story short, I think there is sufficient demand now, and I think that now the question is more how do we do it, not whether we should do it.
The momentum is picking up.
The moment, significantly. Like, I can count, like, I think I remember speaking to judges and senior people in the leadership, pre-COVID, all of them, like, it was not a conversation entertained, and it has now more like, what can you do? Can you do this? How will we do this? That has become, and it's become more an operational challenge than a whether we want to do this challenge.
And on this, I think one of the big things is just the ages of judges that are actually entering and present.
Yeah.
Somebody who does mobile banking, right, who does UPI, who does everything else, why will they tolerate no digitization being in a system that is still slow to change in some ways? And I think some of these pressures, I think the check bounce example proved this as well, that courts aren't only internal systems, right? They interact with a lot of external stakeholders. And so one of the places where we've seen a big push for technology coming from outside the court, but is still being entertained and taken by the court, is almost in government litigation, where when bureaucrats are being asked to make personal appearances when cases are dragging on, there is a pressure from outside to streamline the system, to figure things out, be more predictable and working, just because it's causing a stress and a cost to a different type of litigant.
I'll also just because like I was saying, haven't been a part of the domain for a long time. So, but I have been part of the executive in general, like worked with the executive. And for me, like the stark difference has been that I fully sort of see that there's now a lot more appetite or a lot more enthusiasm to take up tech. But at the same time, I see judges have a lot of, not dearth of skills, but a very distinct set of skills than executive. For example, bureaucrats have been trained, or almost their job has been to plan, think and execute. And that execute muscle it needs a lot more than just interpretation of law or like of justice in itself. So for example, even in the Kollam example, a lot of them had to not just enable the tech, but look at policy, look at how rules at the state level could change, look at what they can push nationally. Procurement in itself is a very heavily executive dependent function. So if you want to transform a courtroom, how do you get the PWD to move fast? How does the executive and the judiciary talk to each other and unlock almost each other or debottleneck each other? That, or even just change management that Smita was talking about, how do you roll something out at scale? How do you make sure you're taking people along while that is being rolled out? All of this almost implementation and executive, what I would at least have observed, they have a lot more access to, or is part of their daily thing, is a skill that judiciary is now, judges are now picking up. Those bright spots, of course, are more keen and like on the front foot, but that's the skill in that sense also that they're developing, to not just be excited about tech, but to figure out how can they almost unlock or give the grounds to.
So digital literacy, Supriya, would be a crucial issue, right, for adoption. Now, as the young people are coming, born in the internet age.
Yeah, I think it is to a degree. I think the thing that I'm seeing, though, a very simple thing that helps move. See, there are at different stages, different things become important. When you want to just get a foot in the door and get things moving, which is why I was happy to see them prototype. Nothing works like showing and telling. Like if I show, we build a prototype and show this, they wake up to it, because they don't have necessarily, and most people don't have, whether it's a lawyer or a judge who they're so entrenched in the system, they're used to doing something a particular way. But if you show them something, we have found across the board, it moves it from, okay, now how? Then the question of, okay, who do we train, how do we, all of that happens. But given we are still at the nascent states, that show and tell, like, so you have an idea, I would just encourage anyone to just kind of get your hands, build whatever version of the prototype, take it to people, and that kind of helps build the conversation more than saying it should be, why can't it be, let us talk about it. In my experience, that hasn't worked as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
I have dealt with a lot of judges in my career for the last 20 years now. My experience tells me that, they are, like Sir has mentioned, why are they not, catching up? The reason being that you see their judgments are also subject to scrutiny. It is not that it is the word of law and, it goes into the execution part, and once it goes into the execution, then it goes into the appeal. And the implementation and enforcement is again bringing back the whole thing into the system again. So this somewhere or the other, the momentum is still building up.
Yeah.
And then with all these programs and DPG and DPI initiatives, like what had happened to the banking system, will also eventually have to get into the court system as well. That is my observation.
And it helps that there's an enabling environment around that.
Correct. It will bring the ecosystem will
Exactly.
gradually
We're
start
seeing
building
law
up.
firms increasingly hire CTOs.
Correct.
Right?
Earlier I didn't get paid by the clients,
Yeah.
electronically, but I give them my Paytm number and I get paid. So that is also, you see, it is because of all this initiatives that are being taken.
Just simple thing I want to understand, because as we talk about the entire ecosystem and all the mechanisms we're talking about, what I also feel from the other side sitting here, that we are missing on one big thing, which is the respondent side of the litigation. Because all we're talking about consumer centric, litigant centric, but what we are talking about, they are not coming to the court. That's why the cases are delayed. They are not checking the cause list because they are not interested. They're not coming for the check bounce thing. So like when we are building the technology, what we're building is always the consumer centric thing. And we are missing out that the law will not decide the case unless and until we bring the other side of the, or to the context. So like the thought, because last 2-3 years we've been working on this, all these spaces. What I feel is we're still struggling on the respondent side, because the case can only be decided when the respondent is there for the case. So what is your thought how we should actually bring the other side also and make it more, like if you're talking about ODRs, the success depends when the other party comes. And if we don't do the entire pom-pom on the front side, I know it's a early phase, we're still building it.
I think this is a very valid thing, and that tendency is definitely there, and you're right, we have to get, because when you think litigant, there are two sides, and then again there are different kinds of litigants, people, companies, government, and all of that. I think, for example, in our work with at least TechOne, one of the biggest thing we found is like even this thing of summons, right? First, we just assume we operate from a place of bad trust. You don't want to come. The truth is today, for most often people, we are not sending it to the right address. So we found umpteen number of people who are just like, we didn't know this, right? Two, then you look at the text of what I'm sending you to come. It is ununderstandable. I read the first one to my mind, and being a lawyer, I was like, is this what we are sending people? Like how, like it'll be one of those things that if you get in your courier, you just say, I'll ignore this, because you want to kind of like not deal with it as far as possible. So language is impossible to understand. Third, very simple thing, I said, there is no two-way communication. I get a summons, I'm told I have to come on November 15th. If that date doesn't work for me, issues happening, and one of the things we have tried to push is to say, can you do away with these things completely, which prevent these things from happening? But I think we have to continue thinking about more of how this can happen, and would love to hear
that. And I'm sorry, I would just say, one is the pattern of the different kinds of reasons and what is happening, and qualitatively. The other thing that's a bit of a missing piece of the puzzle is just how many cases are in which bucket. So the National Judicial Data Grid, which is kind of the main source of data for anyone who's looking for judicial data and doesn't feel like scraping a website, they actually launched a new version, I feel like just last week or very recently, and for the first time, one of the tabs in the pages is reasons for delay, which was not there before. So now if you have overall pending disposed reasons for delay, then you think of it on two levels, and one is just, okay, fine, is it delayed at a summons and evidence, what stage is it at? And then within that, what are the different dynamics and reasons that might happen that allows a court more information about how to monitor and how to accurately design what has to be done in which situation, and which is also contributing the most. And so, the 80-20 rule coming in there. So I think, that the open data part of the DPGs is so critical to figuring out what is going on at a human level to actually deal with it.
Just the second part to it, you've talked about a lot of pendency and other things. My question is on the side of understanding how the judiciary is functioning in terms of the infrastructure. Like, see, we're talking about one date and the other date is the 3-month gap. How can we reduce the gap? Of course, we can increase the number of hearing in few days, like for example next week. It will be shortening the cycle. So how the infrastructure part is being dealt, because we have lack of judges. On an average 3 minutes are being given to a particular case. That's a problem even for the judiciary. Like how long we are expecting these guys to work, like it's very difficult. want to understand how the government, or not as a representative of the government, but how this infrastructure part is being dealt and what are the solutions, because if we do not solve that, this circle is not going to be a shorter one. And of course, and this problem may be defined to us 5% or 10%, it will not impact to a 10, 15, 20, 30%. So what is your thought and what you have heard about from the government side, that like open code is an excellent scheme that we have heard about. But on the infrastructure side from the government, like anything happening, any buzz, which can definitely, I believe that can shorten the cycle of the litigation.
So I'll take a step, and like a lot more people are working, so can add to it. One of the things like you're saying is the today like cases are happening from hearing to hearing, right? I only know what is either available or not available when somebody comes to that hearing, even if that information was present with me before. The second is, if that information was present with me before, I don't have any way to communicate with the court beforehand or beforehand about it. So one part of that puzzle was to make sure that people, both the parties, have opportunity to upload or to share things that they have at hand before. The second part of it was to tie scheduling to it. So if a judge knows that a next hearing will only be effective if XYZ things are done beforehand, or are procured beforehand, or are secured beforehand and shared with both the other party and the court, then giving that judge the ability to set that in a system, or to make sure that those steps are taken care of before the next hearing, so that by the time the next hearing comes, it is a more effective hearing. So almost one part of it is efficiency, the other part of it is how do we increase the effectiveness of a hearing itself, and what information having beforehand and facilitating efficiency in that, what will help that hearing become effective. So that is on how do we make that next hearing not just a hearing that needs to be adjourned, but something where materially things might move, or the case stage might change, or the case will move ahead. So one was that line of thinking. The other was around access itself. A lot of the times, hearing after hearing, you will schedule because people are not able to come physically, or people are not able to show up, turn up in whatever form or shape. So making sure that it is, of course, like not just that, but like during COVID, a lot of the courts did open up to virtual hearings and stuff. But how do you make sure that that's actually easy, that's actually something that they can do virtually, or if they don't have access to it, how can they come to the nearest court point? So for this particular Kollam court, if there are, let's say, by data, a few court points where most of the respondents or complainants come from, how do we make those court points also accessible, also ready technologically, and then making sure that the experience for those people, if they come in person, virtually or hybrid, remains the same in terms of effectiveness. So that's, I think, second. But yeah, I think both around improving the effectiveness of it is perhaps like why it may move forward and sort of reduce that hearing on hearing sort of issue.
I think there are also a lot of other infrastructural projects when it comes to like transcription of court proceedings, which are definitely helping with the amount of time that it takes for judges to produce their orders and judgments, and then for the entire process to get over. So there is a lot more acceptance and experimentation that's happening at the Supreme Court and High Court levels, which I think is helping. Second is that a lot of these computer committees or e-committees are coming up in High Courts and Supreme Courts, right, which are more encouraging like startups as well to like come and submit their innovative solutions, and then they're willing to like incorporate them. Where I think there might be a breakdown is that these are happening in slightly disaggregated ways. That one High Court is doing this, the other is doing that. Is there a way for us to create some sort of a uniform dashboard or uniform kind of services which allows for more interoperability across High Courts as well, which is what definitely lacks today. Just to your earlier point, I wanted to give an example of Sama, which is an ODI provider. What they did an experiment where every time they would send a summons, they would send it with a mithai ka dabba, right, with like a sweet box. And they saw that literally increased the number of people who would end up then showing to the court proceedings. And it wouldn't just be their postal officers also. They would send like case managers within their organization. So, those kind of things, like Supriya was saying, like those kind of things do help.
So, Rita, you mentioned CTOs are being hired by legal firms. Actually, they should hire CISOs. But they have so much private and confidential data of people
Yeah.
and organizations.
Okay, so that's it from the breakout. We'll head back to the main plenary session. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming.